the Tower of London's chapel of St Peter ad Vinicula, final resting place of Thomas Cromwell, Anne Boleyn and Thomas More. Where better to discuss the BBC drama series Wolf Hall with its director Peter Kosminsky and star Mark Rylance.
The series has been such a massive success and is sold all over the world. You know, to what do you attribute its appeal?
You know, it's taken us all by surprise. We knew we were working, wonderful actors, fantastic script, extraordinary source material, Hilary Mantell's novels. But in the end, it's a costume drama about the Tudors, and that's been done before. I don't know why it has gripped the nation in the way it appears to have done. It's been, for us, a big surprise.
But I mean, that's a kind of winner for you, Mark, because you notoriously shied away from television and film, and what was it about this that was different? What drew you to this?
I had read the script before the book, actually, to be honest. My wife had read the book and had loved it, but I'd been so busy I hadn't been able to do that. And so I really took the project on the script, which was a phenomenally good script. But to be able to bring a large, 2 books, down in the way he did to these essential scenes, I think it's extraordinary work. And then the next big question for me was who was to direct it. And once Peter, adjusted his plans, then I was on board. So but I wasn't on board until Peter was on board.
So was this a kind of act of persuasion?
We had a coffee together. Yeah, I definitely, there were things I might have asked another director that I didn't ask Peter.
And a lot to learn, because you're not a man for, as it were, costume drama or period drama. You're absolutely not that kind of director.
Well, I had a bad formative experience, Kirsty. I did an adaptation of Wuthering Heights, and it was terrible. It wasn't good, and it sort of scarred me.
Didn't do bad for Ralph Fiennes.
No, Ralph Fiennes did okay. But I thought, well, I can't do that. That's not me. And when Mark and I had worked together before, it had been on a contemporary piece about the death of Dr. David Kelly, which Mark played so beautifully. And, but when he asked me, I'd been wanting to work with him again. It had been 10 years. You don't want to work with, saving his presence, with Mark Rylance on something that isn't right. You want to work on something that has enough of a range and depth and intensity that allows him to do what he does so brilliantly. And, this was such an opportunity, so it was hard to refuse.
When you came to inhabit Cromwell, what were your first thoughts? I mean, he was such a complex character. But also, I was thinking that you are quite a private person, and I think Cromwell, perforce, had to be like that too, didn't he?
What comes to my mind is I was very struck by him being a runaway at age 14, and someone who learnt to survive on the street in Europe at that time, got involved in armies and then provisioning armies, and then the rag trade, and it was a rough way of speaking what he did, and then banking. But I've known I know a wonderful poet down in Brixton, actually, who came down from the north, arrived at King's Cross, and lived rough for a year or 2 in Soho with a gang of kids. Just fed themselves, by finding out where the hotels dumped their extra food and stuff like that. And so I thought of people like that. They keep the cards they have to play close to their chest. And I think that always struck me, that served Cromwell very well as he moved into even more dangerous, powerful places.
I think one of the questions that we asked ourselves was, it's easy to talk about, a man who comes from nothing to great power, but then stop and think about that for a moment, and think about the times. This is like the first person who ever did this. And you think, what was it that Cromwell had to allow him to so capture the attention of the king, to so mesmerize society that for those few short years he was essentially the ruler of the land? He has to have been an incredibly powerful, charismatic, and that, I think, is Mark's triumph, that he, doing very little, he creates this sense of fascination, that you're wondering what he's thinking, what's he going to say.
You convey that so brilliantly with a look on obviously many occasions, but when he's looking at Jane Seymour, what I love is the audience has to do the work too, because I think, what is he thinking? Is he thinking that she is the next wife? I mean, you get a sense always that he's living by his wits.
Yeah, I watched a lot of films before we began to film. I wanted to really try and see what the great film actors were doing. And I was particularly impressed by Brad Pitt in a film called The Assassination of Jesse James, where he does very, very little. And I just found myself completely pulled into it. And I've always admired Robert Mitchum, and so I really wanted to dare to just think. And Peter was very encouraging. Sometimes often when you're acting, you think things you didn't prepare to think. They come flitting across your mind as I look at Claire Foy or look at what Damon's doing, and sometimes it would be so fast, the thought, but he would come up to me after a take and said, "Oh, I saw you were thinking that, weren't you?" And I couldn't believe that he had seen that thought. He's a very good observer of what actors are doing. In fact, he has other directors don't do this. He has someone else say action, because by that moment he's already buried himself in the viewer and trying to connect with us.
I like that idea that you're the director as observer. That in a sense, your work is sort of done to a certain extent, and you're observing.
Well, my work is done. Really, my work is done on the script and in casting the actors. And if you're quite inexperienced, and I certainly was guilty of this, you sort of think, well, I better say something, because otherwise I'm not really being the director. But if you've got nothing to contribute, it's best to stay silent.
One of the most important kind of electric relationships in the series is between Thomas More, who's over there in the tower, and Thomas Cromwell. Tell me how you two talked about that relationship.
I think we all have a part of us that's idealistic. Our parents or ourselves or the things we admire raise ideals of how our life should be, and we all have a part that's pragmatic. And so it was easy to feel I was talking to my idealistic side, and the drama expressed a drama that goes on in each of us. I think whatever level of society you live in, you've got that. These two acted out at a very, very high, dangerous level of society. I think that's why this story comes round so often as such a popular myth, because it's something that happens in many, many people's lives. If only one of them could have got to Henry and Anne, and with the benefit of what we know now, then have to tell them, look, you have given birth to one of the greatest sovereigns this country will ever have. And because of this mindset at the time that only a man can be a great king, you're going to destroy your marriage, and this woman's going to die, and it's all ridiculous. If you could change your mindset and accept that a woman might be a great sovereign, you should be the happiest parents in the world right now. From the Catholic point of view, More is arguing, you mustn't go against, if you've had a child. He's arguing for Mary, of course. Mm-hmm. Then you should accept that is God's plan, even if it seems a difficult thing. And from Cromwell's point of view, he would have gone in there and encouraged, from a pragmatic point of view, you have a child, why cause all this problem trying to have another one?
What is so great about the script and the way that it's realised is that you're not looking at it as history, you're in it.
Well, she writes that's one of the joys of reading the book, and I would recommend, if you haven't read the book and like the show, then read the book, because there's so much more in it that's wonderful. But after a while, it takes a little while, you have to get into it, but then you suddenly have a feeling, I'm in the room with them. Yeah. It feels like I'm there with them. And
not knowing the next move.
That's right. And I think maybe because she's made it seem so unlike a historical novel. That's maybe why people assume that her research or her work is reckless or careless, but she researched for 5 years. And so I think the critics that you may read of whether this is true or not, you have to remember she did a lot of work. She didn't just come in and do a popular version of this story.
Of course, there's a lively debate going on, particularly in the Twitter sphere, about our interpretation of Cromwell. And some people feel this is sort of horribly revisionist, and the man was a brute and a cheat, very much his father's son. And I personally Don't care two hoots. I'm moderating my language. Don't care two hoots about that. You know, this is Hilary's vision, and we have embraced it and enjoyed embracing it.
I've had a great letter comparing me to Alec Guinness's character in The Bridge on the River Kwai, that I built in playing Cromwell, I built a very good bridge, but forgot about the war. I think that people are very enamored of Thomas More and upset to see that utopian people have a shadow. People are forgetting the book shares a wonderful Catholic man in a very good light, Cardinal Wolsey, with all the flexibility of
and all the vainness
Catholic
as well, you know.
Yeah, and the love of food and of the world, rather than a desire to repress and move away from the world.
But the portrayal of Moore seems to be entirely what has created this attack on Hilary Mantell for being anti-Catholic.
Well, some of the attack happened before episode 4, and it's been a bit more muted since then. When you get into the long and quite complex discussions, particularly the two scenes in the tower between Cromwell and More, you start to see the sophistication of the argument.
I'll send my barge to row you back to Chelsea, back to your garden, your children, back to Dame Alice, who'll be waiting to bear you up to your own bed.
We see this drama through Cromwell's eyes, and we're left in absolutely no doubt that Cromwell has a huge personal respect for More, that he'll do almost anything. I mean, he gets into the moment, probably one of only 2 really difficult moments with the king, where he says, I'm really not sure we can do this with More.
I don't doubt his loyalty to Rome, nor his hatred of Your Majesty's title as head of the church. However, legally, our case is slender. It won't be easy.
Do I keep you for what's easy? Do you think I've promoted you for the charm of your presence? I keep you because you are a serpent. Do not be a viper in my bosom. You know my decision. Execute it.
Cromwell, the ultimate pragmatist, thinks it's just, when you get down to it, it's just such a waste.
Yeah.
It's just a waste of a great man and a great intellect. And it's this debate between a man who is entirely focused on the next life, who thinks, if I do something like that now, I will suffer in perpetuity, and a man who is essentially worried about living this life, not so focused on the next one. And that's what makes this complex and interesting.
Damian Lewis as Henry VIII gives us this person who is capricious, entirely dangerous, despotic. In a sense, he's a despot that we can all understand, because he's like any despot.
I have great sympathy for Damien's Henry, and I'm just struck by the enormous pressure on him after this period of civil war. It's easy to forget that and I was talking with Peter about last night and saying, you know, eventually a nation like Iraq, which is in such violent difficulty now, eventually a ruler will come forward, like Nelson Mandela or someone, who will unite that nation, and that ruler will have a child, 2 children, say Arthur and Henry. The pressure on those children to maintain the hard-fought stability for a nation after a long period of civil war is enormous, and that pressure, it all lands on Henry. It warps his character. It's too much pressure.
I have not forgotten how I helped your master against the French. He promised me territory. Next thing I hear, he's making a treaty with Francois. The Emperor treats me like an infant. First he whips me, then he pets me, then he whips me again. Well, tell him I am not an infant! And tell him to keep out of my family business! First he tells me how I should marry, then he wants to show me how to deal with my own daughter! No. I demand a profound and public apology.
He became very like his father, very paranoid, very suspicious of anything that didn't come from himself. And a man like Cromwell, who appears to be the second most powerful person in the land, ends up realizing that it's either do what Henry says or die, And that is the dilemma that casts the shadow over the final episode, episode 6, where he's forced to do something he absolutely doesn't want to do, which is destroy Anne Boleyn, a woman for whom he has the greatest respect. And it's her or him.
Cromwell is watching her go to her death. And in that moment, he doesn't want her to die.
No, of course not. He can see Cromwell many moves ahead on the chessboard, and he's trying to encourage the other player to get off the road before they get hit. When you read the book, you see that he's supporting so many members of his family. He's taking in orphans. He's giving out a lot of money outside his house. We know that he gave money for the roads in his will. He's supporting a lot of other people. So he knows if he goes down, a lot of wildlife goes down as well. He wants to keep himself enabled to do good to others. And if the person won't save themselves, then, you know, they shouldn't be in the game.
Peter Strawn has written it brilliantly. So you see the intercutting between Cromwell on the morning of the execution, talking to the executioner, trying to make sure that she doesn't suffer and that it's done properly.
How will he do it?
She kneels. There is no block.
And then the event itself. He wants her to have a clean and painless death. And then he goes to Henry, and Henry throws open his arms, and with a great beam on his eye to welcome him. And we see Cromwell's face, and we see a man caught in a trap, arguably of his own making. And I'm thinking of Faust, who made a pact with the devil and then came to realize what that pact would cost him.
You talk about the way that Peter works, and there's a real challenge in bringing the right atmosphere. So first of all, locations. Was that actually a great challenge to get the right locations? Was it enjoyable? Tell me about some of that.
Well, thank God we were going to be filming in Europe, in Bruges, I think.
Yes.
And Peter went and had a look and said, this doesn't look like England, and insisted that we filmed in English locations, which was just wonderful.
Mark's absolutely right, and it was a joy, you know, when we were filming that very final scene between Cromwell and Henry in Penshurst Place, in the gallery. We were actually in a room that Henry and Anne Boleyn had stood in.
Was there a frisson for you about that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's a frisson for me here today in this chapel with them being buried here, and we're right near where they were executed. History leaves such a resonance, and also the beauty of the gardens and the beauty of the land around. I'd forgotten how just fantastic the resource in England of these houses is. So all of that encourages you, with the clothing and everything, to take on a sensibility that they had.
Also, much has been made of the candlelight, but I'm reminded of something that Hilary said. She said that candlelight does something amazing to your imagination. Was that what you were thinking?
Well, I asked Gavin Finney, our director of photography, a fairly simple question, which is it possible, with the technology that we have, to shoot night scenes by candlelight? And he said, yes, I think it is.
Do you think he's afraid of me?
Why should he be?
I don't know.
First of all, I wanted day to be very bright with strong white light, and night, the rooms take on a completely different character. The shadows are profound. We have one scene where Joan, Cromwell's sister-in-law, slowly extinguishing candles around the room until Cromwell is left lit just by one light.
And the fire.
Does John Williamson not do his duty by you?
His duty's not my pleasure.
There's a conversation I shouldn't have had.
That sense of closing in on him till you're just left in a pool of light. For me, you know, well, that was an artistic choice. That wasn't, you know, it wasn't in the book or scripted particularly.
And another way that you make it so much from Cromwell's perspective is by using the handheld camera. Explain how you decided the trajectory for all that.
That's a
how
heavy
that
camera, you know. That's
well.
a 30-pound camera. Pick up a 30-pound weight in your gym, and that's what Gavin was wearing that every day. For 17 weeks, he had to train. He had to do physical training and carry on training in the morning and on the weekends to make sure his back didn't go down.
It almost was as if the camera was one of the performers. You know, I don't like to hold back, hold off like that camera's doing over there. I like the camera to be with Mark. You know, one of the challenges that we faced, so much of the novels is interior world of Cromwell, and we didn't want narration. So how do you convey the sense that we're with this man, that he is not just the main character, but he's our character, he's the person who's guiding us through?
Taking you now to a scene where I thought that Mark was just actually about to really kill Damien Lewis rather than save Henry. Tell me about the jousting scene.
We made a decision on the day. I threw it at Mark, really, which normally in that situation, what you would do is you'd have all the extras miming. They'd all be going, and it would be silent. And you'd then record the dialogue, and the actors would have to shout as if everyone, and then at the end, you'd record all the crowd making a noise. And I just didn't think that would work. This was a very frantic scene. So what we did was we decided to do it for real. We got everybody to shout and scream, and Mark and Bernard Hill, who plays Duke of Norfolk, and the other actors, and Damien, had to act with all this noise and confusion and racket. And, you know, it was quite chaotic, really, wasn't it?
It was in a very small tent and just doing one take. And we had very, very good extras on this film, I have to say, who stood in the rain, and they were marvelous. But on this day, they didn't seem to know who I was or that I was going to be. I don't think anyone had told them I was going to come through. And I really had to push and get in there. And then they were all pushing around.
What do you mean leaving him lying here, untouched by Christian hands?
I think I pulled my blow as I tried to get Damien's heart going.
I think you got carried away.
Maybe. I don't know.
When we're watching it, we're very aware of the kind of modernity of the dilemmas. Does it play to a modern political sensibility, do you think, Peter?
I do, and I think Mark has referred earlier to the battle between idealism and pragmatism. And, you know, I'm currently working on something about ISIS, the Islamic State, which is, I suppose, a form of idealism. Islam is about 500 years younger than Christianity. And the period we're looking at here is about 500 years ago. So we're looking at a time when Christianity was about the same age as a religion as Islam is today. And what were we doing back then? Well, we were chopping people's heads off. We were burning people alive at the stake. We were disemboweling people alive, and then drawing and quartering them. And why? Why were we doing that? We were doing it primarily over quite subtle differences of interpretation of religious doctrine. Does that sound familiar?
But also in the manner in which the court operates, the wheeling and dealing, you know, the backstabbing. I mean, people don't often have a very high opinion of modern-day politics. There's some modern-day politics in all this as well, though, isn't there?
Certainly, Henry's struggle with a force outside of England, the Catholic Church. I think our modern politicians have a great struggle with the multinational forces of business. The fight for democracy, the fight even in a village to have the right to say we don't want a Tesco's, we want to keep our high street. So the period tells us a lot about a struggle for independence. In that time, it's the independence of the monarch. At the moment, it's a struggle for the independence of a democratic elected government from outside influences. In that way, it's very parallel. In some ways, you can see Henry VIII being like, as he separates from the Catholic Church, as being in as vulnerable position as Chavez in Venezuela, and his paranoia being similar to what appears at times to be paranoid behavior of a leader like Chavez. Do you think there's a similarity to that?
Yeah.
You've now created a Cromwell who is still, you know, moving, still on the up. Hilary's vision of him is not complete. So although you know the general trajectory because you understand history, you don't really know how he's going to play it.
No, I don't. No, I'm not a historian.
Yeah.
I know that because Peter's told me that the last words he writes to Henry from a room somewhere in the vicinity here are mercy, 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 4 or 5 times in his final plea to Henry and before he's beheaded. So I know where it's heading, so to speak.
Your plan is to go on and complete the journey with Cromwell.
Oh yeah, of course. If she is able to write the book, but Hilary's now has 3 children. She has the book, which is the 2 books. She has the play, the RSC have done, and she has our film. I think it's proven quite difficult for her to go back into that lonely single mum place of writing a book that all writers have to go to, which is really hard. And then it's impossible for her not to be affected by the manifestations that Ben Miles and I have brought to Cromwell, that Anton and John Ram have brought to Moore. All of this stuff, she's no longer just working with historical documents. She's working with the impressions we've added to it.
And do you think that'll be actually a joy for her, or actually very tough for her to go back?
Well, it's difficult because I've spoken to Hilary about the book. You know, she's just, all she will say is it's going well, and it's not going to be a short one. I think we feel like we've done 2/3 of the journey.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, I was terribly affected by the death of Anne Boleyn, and when we shot it, and that day itself was an extraordinary day. But it will be as nothing to the impact that it would have, I think, on all of us to shoot the execution of Cromwell. If we do this, we're going to go on a dark journey again.
And do you have fears for Cromwell's end yourself as an actor? How you're going to deal with it? Peter's
when I watch
upset?
it, I'm already concerned for him taking advantage of Henry's cruelty to Anne to settle old scores. You know, he's already dying inside Cromwell, and he's already in the mindset of it's just collateral damage, you know, that, and it's a dog-eat-dog world, so he's heading towards some karma, for want of a better word.
On the last week of shooting after your 17 weeks, you took treats in for the crew.
Yes, I had a different snack each afternoon, I think. Lovely Japanese food or lots of different things. But it ended with an ice cream truck, which came with a marvelous kind of it played some funny tune. I can't remember the tune.
Mr. Whippy tune.
Mr. Whippy tune, yeah. And we all queued up and have lovely Whippy ice creams.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, and we never knew what was coming each day. And so we'd sort of troop out of whichever stately home we happened to be in at around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon to discover what Mark had arranged for us. And it really rounded the thing off beautifully.
Very Cromwellian, wasn't it?
Peter Kosminsky, Mark Rylance, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who was the real Thomas Cromwell? Find out about the man behind the myth online at BBC iWonder. Coming up next tonight, stay with us as we head into space with Horizon to ask, are we alone in the universe?